Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Is your practice suffering from the cycle of booms and depressions? Well, what might this look like? 1 month, your office is busy, hopefully productive. It might be hard fitting patients in. It's just crazy. You're crazy busy. And then this is followed by a month, which would be best described as slow. There are openings in the schedule and you're not meeting your production goals, and so on. And then the following month, it's busy again, which is then followed by a slow month. And it doesn't even have to be months. It could be weeks. You could have a busy week or 2 weeks followed by a slow week or 2 weeks. Statistically, this might be manifested on a graph as, an up and down graph. It looks sort of like a sawtooth, just up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. In any event, it makes it tough to plan for and manage your business. So what causes this cycle of booms and depressions? And more importantly, how do you go about fixing it so that you end up with a consistently productive practice? Well, that's what I want to cover in this week's episode. My name is Jeff Bloomberg and I'm your host. And I think we just jump into this thing by taking a look at the formal definition of the cycle of booms and depressions, because it not only gives us insight into what causes it, it gives us an idea of what we do to go about handling it. And if you're familiar with MGE, you know that we use the Hubbard management system developed by L. Ron Hubbard. Now, the Hubbard management system was developed by Mr. Hubbard over the course of a little bit more than 30 years. It consists of literally millions of words and is expansive, as you could imagine. It covers every aspect of managing an organization, from financial planning, executive skills, overall strategic planning, team building, and so on. Pretty much anything you'd want to know about managing a successful organization is found in this. I'll put a link to the Hubbard management system, which tells you a little bit more about it, from the MGE website. I'll put it on the episode webpage if you want to know more. Now, so Mr. Hubbard defined this cycle of booms and depressions very specifically. And before I read the definition, there's a word he uses in the definition quite extensively. And I just want to clarify this word so everybody's here on the same page. The word is outflow. So what is outflow with regards to, well, it's pretty self-explanatory. If you're talking about a person, if someone's outflowing, they would be talking, right? Or they're putting something out, okay? How does this apply to a business? What would be considered outflow in an organization or a business? It would be things like phone calls, letters, texts, promotion, emails. Any type of communication going out from the business to prospective public or existing public, could be existing, in your case, patients of record as an example. That would be classified under the heading of outflow. Now, you could look at the opposite of outflow would be inflow. What would be inflow? Phone calls coming into the practice, promotional responses coming into the practice, patients coming into the practice. That would be inflow. If you send mail out, that's outflow. If mail comes in, that is inflow. Okay, because he uses this word outflow extensively in this explanation, so I wanted to just clarify that before I did it. All right, so how does he define, Mr. Hubbard, the cycle of booms and depressions? Let's have a look. He says, the cycle of a boom and depression is created by the outflow and answer cycle of the department. You don't have any answers coming in, so you sit there and outflow very heavily. Then your mail beefs up, and I'll interject in here just to define that. By beef up, we mean goes up, going up. So I'll read that again. Then your mail beefs up, and you spend your time answering the letters, and you don't outflow. And after a while, business drops off and goes in the trough on the curve. But so by trough here, we're using it figuratively, or Mr. Hubbard's using it figuratively. A trough normally would be what a horse drinks out of, right? Like a trough, or a cut in the ground, right? Like a furrow in the ground. In this sense, trough is a low point for a business or an organization. On a stat graph, it would be represented as a drop, a severe drop. All right, so I'll read that again. And after a while, business drops off and goes in the trough on the curve, and then you get anxious and promptly outflow, which brings in lots of business and replies, but no outflow. So let me read that one more time without having to define everything, just so you kind of get this whole concept. The cycle of a boom and depression is created by the outflow and answer cycle of the department. You don't have any answers coming in, so you sit there and outflow very heavily. Then your mail beefs up, and you spend your time answering the letters, and you don't outflow. And after a while, business drops off and goes in the trough on the curve, and then you get anxious and promptly outflow, which brings in lots of business and replies, but no outflow. So I'll have a copy of this quote if you want to download it on the episode webpage. We'll put a link for this cycle of booms and depressions. But let's now unpack this with relation to a dental practice. How is this represented in a dental practice? Obviously, as Mr. Hubbard's writing this, he's referring to letters and answers coming in and out of an organization. So let's look at a dental practice for a second. When things aren't busy, let's say you have 2 or 3 people up at the front and you have a couple hygienists and it's you, maybe with a part-time associate and some dental assistants. Okay. So the office is slow. You have openings in your schedule. The hygienists have 2 or 3 openings a day. There's not a lot going on. You're not meeting your goals. So if there's no patient there or less than expected number of patients there, what are people doing? They're not, cleaning the office. They're not sharpening instruments. They're on the phone. They're calling people because you're not busy. You need to get people in there to get busy, right? So what would we classify those calls under? That would be outflow, okay? You're outflowing. So you're outflowing, calling people, texting people, emailing people, call, the executive list, the quick call list to get people in to fill the last minute opening, the incomplete treatment planning list, all of this stuff, the reactivation list. We're calling and we're sending letters and so on. So we're outflowing. But then what happens as a result of all of that outflow? Well, people make appointments, they come in, and the office gets busier again. So now what created that busyness? What created that busyness was all of the outflow. But then when you're busy, who has time to outflow like that? Maybe your schedule coordinator made 100 phone calls in a day because there were hardly any patients there when the office was slow. But now the place is packed. Your schedule coordinator doesn't have time to make 100 phone calls today. They make maybe 15. Because they're doing walkout statements, scheduling patients for their next visit, and so on, and confirming appointments. So the outflow drops because the office is busy. So now let's compare that again to this cycle of booms and depressions. You don't have any answers coming in, as Mr. Hubbard says. So you sit there and outflow very heavily. Office is empty, so what do? Instead of letters, answers he's talking about here, there's no patients coming in, so you call. And then he goes on. Then your mail beefs up. If we compare this to a dental practice, now the patients come in and get busy. And you spend your time answering the letters, he says, and you don't outflow. So you're spending your time handling the patients that are there, and the outflow stops or becomes much, much less. And after a while, he says, your business drops off and goes in the trough on the curve. Your stack crashes. And then you get anxious and promptly outflow, which brings in lots of business and replies, but no outflow. So you're slow, so you make a lot of phone calls. And during that slow period, you have time to make the phone calls. So then the result of those phone calls, letters, emails, texts, and so on, is people come in. But now you're busy. You don't have time to make those phone calls, or it's not monitored or pushed to make sure that we're making those phone calls, sending those letters out, sending those texts, and so on. So the outflow drops off. So we're basically forecasting a slower period that's going to come up in the future. What do we do during that future slower period? We all start outflowing again. And it's this vicious cycle that goes on and on and on. Up, down, up, down, up, down. And if you wanted to do this graphically, just based on what Mr. Hubbard's saying here, let's say you had 2 graphs, okay, 2 statistic graphs. And one was productivity, production, collections, whatever you want to call it. Let's say production. And then the other graph was outflow. And you were graphing these weekly, let's say. So you graph production weekly and you graph outflow weekly. You track the number of phone calls, letters, mail, email, etc. What you'd probably see is the weeks where production is very high, outflow is low. And then the weeks where production is low, outflow is high. It's almost like they work inversely to one another, or rather not inversely, opposite to one another. When outflow's up, production's down. When production's up, outflow's down. And this just creates this vicious cycle that repeats again and again and again. So what is the way out? Well, this definition alone gives you the way out. The key is to maintain consistent outflow. So how do we do this? How do we maintain consistent outflow in the practice? Well, the first thing is everybody has to be aware of it and make it important. And I'm going to talk a bit more about how the amount of outflow, mailings, letters, communication relates to your income a little bit later in the episode here. But it has to be first a point of awareness that it's important. So if I'm your treatment coordinator, I have to understand that when I'm not sitting in front of a patient, my first priority is outflow, not cleaning my desk out because, I don't like how my right-hand drawer looks. Okay. And I'm not saying that in a negative way, but if nobody sees it as a priority, if it's just one and the same with everything else, then it's not going to be prioritized. So it has to be prioritized. There has to be an awareness about how important outflow is to the overall business if you want to keep it consistent. So that's the first thing. The second thing is every job in an office has specific types of outflow that are expected. For example, and this isn't ideal, but just to give you an example, let's say my hygienist has a 2-hour opening today and we can't fill it. So the hygienist has a few different choices. They could sharpen their instruments. They could, do some type of little organization action that they wanted to do, make bags, for what you give a patient at the end of a hygiene visit, make 50 bags so they have them for next time the patients are in. Or they could get on the phone. Now, is it ideal? Would I want to spend $45 to $60 an hour for somebody to be on a phone? Probably not. But if I'm spending that money anyway, I'd rather it was directed to outflow because generally, a hygienist is probably going to have an easier time scheduling a patient than maybe even the scheduler because they know the patient intimately from working on them in hygiene, So I would prioritize the outflow. I know it's not ideal. I just threw that out there. But if I had to choose what they're going to do, that's what they're going to do. A schedule coordinator has other types of outflow they're supposed to do, whether it's patients of record that are overdue, patients that need a hygiene appointment, rearranging the schedule. These are all forms of outflow that go with their job. What about a treatment coordinator? So, most people think of a treatment coordinator. What's their job? They're sitting in with you when you're doing a treatment presentation, or they might be doing it on their own. I'm not going to get into all that, but let's just say that's what they do. They're sitting in front of patients and working out financial arrangements. But are they doing that 8 or 9 hours a day? Probably not. They might be doing it 5 or 5.5. What are they doing the rest of the time? They should be outflowing. Now, where would that outflow start? It might be I'm contacting patients that are more recent presentations that haven't wrapped up yet. I spoke to Mr. Smith, and Mr. Smith had to check with his wife, and he was about to leave town before he agreed to do this treatment plan and told me to call him in a week and a half. I'd start there, and I should have a list of these people. Then I'm going to go after incomplete treatment plans. Now, the incomplete treatment plan list, and I think I've mentioned this before in prior episodes. When you're getting close to episode 100, you forget what you've mentioned and you haven't before. But with any of the incomplete treatment plan list, what happens with that list is people look at that list. You'll see a doctor look at that list and go, you'll get one of two reactions. One, wow, I have $4 million of incomplete treatment here. My office will be busy forever. Or two, it's depressing. How do I have $4 million of incomplete treatment? But the idea of all of that incomplete treatment being a quote unquote gold mine, which I've heard that term used before, isn't necessarily the right way of assessing it. What your incomplete treatment list is essentially a list of people who did not close for treatment. That's why it's not a fruitful source. Ask any scheduler. It is not a fruitful source of filling openings on the schedule. So you have a 3-hour opening, next Monday for a primary procedure, a high dollar value procedure. I guarantee you most schedulers, they might have done this in the beginning of their career, but it isn't where they go now. Don't immediately pull out the incomplete treatment list and go, oh gosh, this is going to be easy. I'll just call, 1 or 2 people on here and they'll fill that 3-hour opening. It usually isn't a fruitful source because they're going to call somebody and, hey, Mrs. Jackson, are you ready to get those 4 crowns done yet? We have a 3-hour opening, or we have an opening on Monday where we could see you. No, I'm still thinking about it. They're not sold. Okay. So that's the first thing to know. Of course, you're occasionally going to get somebody who comes in, but usually those are going to be people like the earlier example, somebody who you were supposed to call back in a week and a half or 2 weeks that was supposed to talk to a spouse or whatever. So how would the treatment coordinator use this incomplete treatment list? Well, one of 2 ways. First off, let's say a bunch of these people on this list are overdue for a checkup. Well, go ahead and call these folks and schedule them for their next recall visit. This is the treatment coordinator calling. Why? Because you're going to get them in. They're going to see the hygienist. They're coming in. Then the doctor sees them when they come in, and the whole treatment plan presentation, process starts anew. That's how you would sell that. Now you can close it. The patient is physically there. What about a patient who you saw 3 months ago or 2 months ago, and they're not due for a cleaning yet? Maybe they're not, they're just not due. Why would I call this person? They're due 3 months from now. Well, in those cases, the treatment coordinator could call that patient and have them come in and see the doctor to see if, the doctor wants to see you just to see if everything's remaining stable. Gives the doctor another opportunity to talk to the patient. Maybe last time they were there, you didn't really have time, and you can explain that to the patient, and you might actually close them at that point. But that would be what the treatment coordinator is doing. They're outflowing when they're not sitting in front of a patient. They're not reorganizing their forms, or they're doing things that are, they might have to do those things, but the priority is always outflow. So you get everybody aware of it. You make everybody realize what outflow goes along with their specific job description, and then you have them do it. The office should also be regularly promoting, whether it's newsletters to patients, seasonal mailers to patients. These should be figured out, scheduled, and never missed. You should also be doing some type of promotion in your area. It could be newsletters, could be whatever. Look, there's zillions of different ways to do this. If you want to know more about new patient marketing, I definitely suggest you do the MGE New Patient Workshop. I'll put a link on the episode webpage. But ultimately, you should be outflowing regularly to your local area in some form of something, whether it's a postcard or something, or emails or something. So those are the things you could do to maintain consistency. But now where it sometimes runs into a problem, if we go back to the way I explained this earlier, which is, you outflow when the office is slow, but then you don't outflow when the office is busy. So now here's where you could run into a problem with this. So let's take, I have a scheduler, and I want them outflowing to the 3,000 to 4,000 inactive or unscheduled patients I have that are not scheduled for hygiene. And you can always get this number if you go to your software and look at the number of patients in your database, and then look at how many have a next appointment. Because that number is usually really low. Might be 20%, it might be 15% in your practice. If it's at 80%, I wouldn't give you a hard time, but I guarantee you it's most likely not. Okay? So you have all these people who don't have a next appointment. So that's really who your scheduler should be outflowing to. But the problem is you have two and a half doctors, you have one full-time, one part-time associate, and 4 hygienists. So when the office is busy, that schedule coordinator is running so hard that they really just don't physically have the bandwidth to allocate to outflow. So now you have a problem, because you could tell them, look, you need to outflow, but what are they going to say? Now, they could be working really inefficiently, but I doubt it. If the office is somewhat productive and you only have one person handling the schedule for essentially, 6.5 providers, 4 hygienists, 2.5 associates, they're not going to be able to keep up. So that's where you have to look at personnel allocation in some of these situations. All right. And this is where you just have to use your head on this, whether it's the doc or the office manager looking, especially with the office manager has a very clear assessment of what's actually involved in that job. That's why it's ideal your office manager sort of rises up through the ranks. That's some of the better managers, although I've seen some come in with 0 experience and they gain it in the office. But your office manager is going to know if they got on the phone and they made, let's say, reactivation calls, A, how many people they could call in a day, and B, how many people they'd expect to schedule. And they can sort of use that as a standard against which you can rate other employees that you're having doing those same tasks. So in this case, the office manager could look at what the scheduler's doing and realize that, when the office is busy, they may be checking out 6 patients an hour. There's just no way. They're not going to have time to get on the phone. Or it's going to be counterproductive because they're going to get on the phone and putting a patient on hold 4 or 5 times, which is also just bad customer service. So in that case, you might need to add another personnel. If you have 4,000 inactive charts, think about that for a second. And this is just math that anybody could do, even if they've never done stuff like this before. If you want to call 4,000 inactive patients, sure, you're going to text them. Sure, you're going to send letters. Sure, you're going to send emails, but not everybody's going to schedule off that. You might get 20%, 25% of people who schedule off of letters, emails, and texts, which means you got to call the other 75%. So if you've got 4,000 inactive patients, 25% we can schedule by, mailers or emails or text, which leaves 3,000 people to still call. So if I put somebody on the phone full time, I could expect at the high end about 100 calls a day. And this is an experienced salesperson, which is most likely not who your scheduler is. Okay. So let's say they do 60 calls a day or 70 calls a day. So it's going to take them, 50 days just to cycle through the 3,000 inactive patients that you have. So you might be looking at 1 or 2 part-time, or 1 full-time and 1 part-time person just working on, reactivation outside of your schedule coordinator. So it's not like I could even imagine that the schedule coordinator is ever going to get to these 3,000 people at the level of persistence that I need in order to recover them. I'm going to have to go out and hire some people. I might need to hire a full-time reactivation coordinator and a part-time one just for the time being. I'm just throwing this out there to give you an idea. So this is where personnel allocation can sort of torpedo your outflow efforts. Because if there's no one in the office or just one patient an hour, sure, that schedule coordinator is going to have plenty of time to call all these people. But when there's 6, they're going to have none. So that's the other thing that can mess up your outflow efforts is when you don't have enough personnel allocated to keep that outflow consistent. Because if you don't, you're going to end up stuck in this cycle of booms and depressions. So the way out is consistent outflow. Now, just on this subject of outflow alone, again, mail, phone calls, letters, and so on. If you were to pick the top 3 business principles, or if I were to pick them, let's say, 3 things that I have to know and always use and always operate with, outflowing consistently would be in the top 3 for me. It's sort of one of those questions. If you were stuck on a desert island and you could only have 1 book or 3 books, what would they be? Well, for me, number 1 would be good service. I think that's the most important thing in any business. You have to deliver good service. It has to be a good value, meaning that the person doesn't feel like they're getting ripped off. It has to be well done. For us, that means if a client comes to us, they see a statistic result, reduce stress. They're happy that they're doing our program. They're getting what they expected and more. Same thing in your office. You want to deliver good dentistry. That's obviously the paramount. That is the most important thing. Now, if we get into the business itself, what I would put at number 2 is outflowing consistently. I would make that number 2. And you might go, well, okay, why? How important is this? Well, it directly affects your income. And I'm going to give you 2 quotes from Mr. Hubbard on this. It's actually from 2 different articles, but I want you to just get the impact of this. Here's the first one. The volume of the income of an organization is in direct proportion to the number of phone calls and letters of an organization. I'll read that again. The volume of the income of an organization is in direct proportion to the number of phone calls and letters of an organization. So if we were to extrapolate this into application, what would we say? If we increase the numbers of letters and phone calls, we should increase the volume of our income, the amount. We would make more money. More phone calls and letters equals more income. You might go, well, how does that work? When will I see this? Well, he explains in this quote. One of the principal routes to solvency is mail volume. If a person were as alive as they gave and received communication, then an organization would be considered as alive as it gave and received pieces of mail. It's that simple. So you watch mail volume in and out if you want to know how you're going to be doing a bit into the future. Knowing that, we can gear up promotion to cope before we get hit with the income slump. A mail volume slump is always followed in a few weeks, usually 6, by an income slump, so it's a valuable danger signal. So what do we get from this? One of the principal routes to solvency, as Mr. Hubbard says, is mail volume. Now, you have a lot of different ways to increase your mail volume. There's email. You could even say personalized texts. There's actual good old-fashioned snail mail, which, I talked about in one of our marketing episodes, is not a bad idea because a lot of people have moved out of that space, whether it's just broad promotion or individual letters. So, it's not a bad place to be. Less people are doing it, so whatever you send is going to stand out more. But this directly relates to your income. Now, you could listen to this and you go, okay, Jeff, so it'll be followed in a few weeks by an income slump, as Mr. Hubbard says, usually 6. But, does this work? Blah, blah, blah. Here's all I'll tell you. I have personal, complete subjective reality that it works. So do our clients. This is something you would have to try in order to see if it works for to know 100%, you'd have to do it on your own. But I will tell you this. This was, if I had to pick the primary driver beyond good service that we built MGE with, it was mail, whether it's email, mail, etc. And when I started in the company back in, the mid to late 90s, what did we do? At that time, we were primarily communicating and mailing and calling to the Northeast. I expanded that to the entire eastern seaboard down through the south because at the time our company was located in Virginia. We eventually moved to Florida in 2003. I then expanded our mail to the entire continental United States. Then I expanded it to Canada. And if you look at our overall production graph and you hold it up against our mail graph, they're virtually identical from a trend perspective as far as how big it got. You know, it's going up here, it would go up there. You'd see a little bit of a delay between mail and production, but our company grew. This is what drove our growth. I could show you client after client after client. Dental practices where you'll see the exact same thing. And how are they outflowing? They're sending out postcards, letters, emails, etc. They're also doing texts and the usual things that just like you do, but they're also doing their seasonal mailings. They're sending out regular newsletters to their patients. You know the other thing that they do? Is if there's a slow period in addition to their phone calls, they'll pull up some names, or if they have physical charts, they'll grab some charts of patients who haven't been in the practice for a while that they know, and they'll write them a letter. Hey, Joe, it's been like 2 years since we've seen you. Where have you been? You know, we were hoping to see you soon. You're overdue for your cleaning. And they just send these things out. And magically, their collections go up, okay? It's not magic. I'm being sarcastic there. It directly relates, as Mr. Hubbard says. So to me, this is one of the top 3 business principles that you should be employing on a regular basis and making it super important. If I were you, I would graph and keep track of your outflow. And that's why, how am I going to know? Like, if I don't even know what my outflow is, how am I going to know if my income's going to be down in 6 weeks? I have no idea. Okay. As he says, usually 6. How am I going to know? If I don't graph the outflow, how am I going to know what to predict? So the first thing you'd want to do is keep track of your outflow. Minimally, the number of pieces of mail leaving your office, whether they're personalized letters, statements, promotional, whatever. You track the mail volume out. That might be one statistic that you keep. And if you can, without making it weird or problematic, track the number of outgoing phone calls from your practice. I mean, these days, that's probably easier than ever. I knew folks that did it back in the 90s where you had to keep like a call log, and that was a bit onerous and exhaustive. But now with all the software you have, it's very easy. You know, I know the exact number of calls that come out of our sales department because it's done via software. I don't have to do anything. I just look at a screen. You might have a similar type scenario. But I would just graph these. Mail volume of the amount of mail leaving the practice, and you could classify mail as just any kind of mail, you know, whether it's promotion, texts, emails, snail mail, etc. And then I would track the amount of phone calls going out if you could, because then I would want to see that graph going up consistently. And because think about this for a second. If you are tracking your outflow, how hard is it to control your outflow? It's very easy. I'm going to send out 2,000 mailings this week. That is 100,000% controllable. There's no chance in there. That's something that is 100% controllable for you. So if you just work on controlling that, you should start to see the benefits down the road with relation to your income. Now, could you do other things to increase your income? Of course, you have to be able to sell and all of these types of things. But even if you're bad at those things, this will help to improve your income overall. And, you know, let's be frank. If you have no income, it's tough to do a lot of other things in your business. That's sort of important, right? So anyway, I wanted to throw that out to you guys because we got into how to handle the cycle of booms and depressions as consistent outflow. But then I wanted to really stress the importance of this overall outflow. I hope it did help. I hope you got something from it. We go over this and a lot more on our online platform, DDS Success. There's a course on there, which essentially during this course, we call it the Practice Jumpstart. This is just one of the concepts we go over. There's a ton of other ones, scheduling and whatnot. But it's Practice Jumpstart. And what the Jumpstart is I spend about 4 hours interviewing Sabri, who you've heard on prior episodes, who's in charge of all of our technical delivery. And she explains, it's almost like she's explaining it to a new client. This is what she goes over with every new client to get their practice jump started. We also have a ton of other courses on there on sales. We also have positional training for schedule coordinator, treatment coordinator, financial coordinator, etc. But this is where you'd find that if you have DDS Success or you're looking at the jump start is where we get into this outflow concept very early because it's extremely important. And as a listener, what I'm offering up, you can get a free demo of DDS Success if you want to check it out. And again, I'll have this link on the episode webpage. But if you want, as a listener, normally DDS Success is $289 per month as a subscription, and you get to have 11 people logged in, including yourself, or 11 users rather, is there's a discount code you can use to save $20 a month. It's RX269. So instead of $289, it's $269 if you want to check it out. But I would definitely give that a look. All right, so that's all I have for you this week, folks. I hope this helps. Please take it to heart. I am a living example of it. So are our clients, of how important outflow is and what it can do for you. I hope this helped on helping you to figure out how to avoid this cycle of booms and depressions. And if you have any questions about MGE, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. Folks, have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.